The belief that demons or evil spirits took possession of human beings is of very great antiquity, and the popular mind had firmly taken hold of this. Whenever a case of this kind occurred, the priest was called in to exorcise the devil, and the Puritan divines were not slow in asserting that if a Roman Catholic could perform a miracle, they at least could turn out an evil spirit, and thus the superstition appears to have been rather fostered than rebuked. One of these demoniac cases took place at an old half-timbered house called Clarewith Hall, where there lived Nicholas, the eldest son of Edmund Starkey of Huntroyd. He had a son John and a daughter Anne, who, with 5 others, were said to have become possessed, when John Darrell was called in to exorcise the evil spirit. An account of this singular instance of ignorance and credulity was written by Darrell and secretly printed in 1600. To cure the patients, however, a conjurer of the name of Hartley was called in, who for his services was to receive 40 shillings a year and bed and board, but this did not satisfy him long, and on being refused additional pay, he so affected the possessed ones that, as Darrell puts it, they sent forth such a strange supernatural and fearful noise and loud whooping as the like was never heard in England. Starkey was naturally not satisfied with the treatment, and having applied to a Manchester physician in vain, he went to the famous alchemist Dr. Dee, then warden of Manchester, who advised him to consult some godly preachers and get them to call a public or private fast day. The eldest son's vagaries were certainly peculiar. He would at times act like a madman or a mad dog, and he and his sisters, we are told, would howl and bark and join in a chorus like a ring of 5 bells. The whole affair was doubtless a fraud, but, nevertheless, it shows in a marked degree the dense ignorance even of some of the well-to-do classes at that time, for we find that Starkey, after his futile appeal to the Manchester physician, Dr. Dee, and others, could only resort to the justices of the peace, who in their wisdom sent Hartley to the Lancashire Assizes, where he was in solemn manner tried, condemned and hanged, not for the evident imposition and fraud, but for witchcraft. The strongest evidence against him being that he had on several occasions drawn magic circles. But perhaps the most curious circumstance about the case is that at his execution the rope broke, whereupon, probably thinking to save his neck, he confessed that he was guilty. The plea, however, failed, and he was quietly hung up a second time. After Hartley's execution, John Darrell and the pastor of Cork, in Derbyshire, were called to Clarewith, and they with 30 others spent a day in fasting and prayer, the result being that the whole 7 were dispossessed, the devil coming out of their mouths in various forms, as a crow's head, a hedgehog, a toad. Not very long after this, King James issued his Demonology, in which he advocated the putting to death of all witches. In the parish of Worley, in a small cottage, lived a woman known as Old Demdike, and her daughter. The mother's real name was Elizabeth Southerns, her daughter was Elizabeth Device alias Young Demdike. Old Demdike, who was over 80 years of age, was supposed to have made her house into a meeting place for all the witches in the neighborhood, and this led to a score of suspected persons, most of them women, being arrested and tried at Lancaster. 8 of these were known as the Witches of Samlesbury, the rest being associated with Pendle Forest. This trial created so much interest in the county that Thomas Potts, the clerk of the court, was ordered by the judges to collect and publish the particulars of the case. From this scarce book may be obtained the full details of this notorious trial. For our present purpose a few particulars must suffice. The wretched old crone, Elizabeth Southerns, died in prison before the trial took place, having first made a confession to the effect that the devil had 20 years before appeared to her, and to him she had sold her soul, and had thus obtained her power. Anne Whittle, before the assizes, not only admitted that she was a witch, but gave the names of many persons whom she had bewitched to death, and several of the others made similar confessions. The whole trial appears to have partaken far more of the nature of persecution than an attempt to ascertain the truth. The leader of this persecution was Roger Noel, of Reed Hall, who, according to the clerk of the court, was one of His Majesty's justices in these parts, a very religious, honest gentleman, painful in the service of his country. Another agent against the Samlesbury prisoners was a priest called Thompson, who tutored the principal witness, Grace Sowerbutts, a girl of 14 years of age, to accuse 3 of the prisoners of having bewitched her. To strengthen the evidence for the prosecution, Roger Noel produced the deposition taken before him at his house, and it appears that he did not scruple to make the sons and daughters condemn their parents, and thus make them instruments for their destruction. Of the character of the evidence given by the various witnesses, the following are samples: Anne Whittle, to spite the wife of one John Moore.
Called for her devil fancy and bade him go bite a brown cow of Moore's by the head and make the cow go mad, and the devil then in the likeness of a brown dog went to the said cow and bit her, which cow went mad accordingly and died within 6 weeks. At a burial at the new church in Pendle she did take 3 scalps of people which had been buried, and then cast them out of a grave, and took 8 teeth out of the said scalps, which were afterwards used for purposes of witchcraft.
They were not only accused of causing the deaths of various people and cattle by charms, but also of being the means of bringing about evil of every description. In the case of Elizabeth Device, her own child, 9 years of age, was set upon the table in the presence of the whole court, and there declared that she knew her mother to be a witch, for she had several times seen her spirit in the shape of a brown dog come to her at her house. Another extraordinary piece of evidence was that of James Device, a son of young Demdike, who first put himself out of court as a creditable witness by confessing that he had recently stolen a sheep, and then swore that he had seen a number of witches at his grandmother's house, who first partook of the stolen mutton and then went out of doors, where they all presently vanished out of sight. Amongst the witches was one Alice Nutter, of the Forest of Pendle, whom Potts describes as a rich woman with a great estate and children of good hope, and in the opinion of the world of good temper, free from envy or malice, and he adds, whether by the means of the rest of the witches or some unfortunate occasion she was drawn to fall to this wicked course of life I know not, but hither she is now come to receive her trial both for murder and many other vile and damnable practices. The witnesses against this prisoner were the other accused and members of their families only. At the conclusion of the trial, Alice Whittle, Elizabeth Device, Anne Redfern, Alice Nutter, Catherine Hewitt, John Bulcock, Jane Bulcock, Eliza Device and Isabel Roby were found guilty and sentenced to be hanged, which sentence was duly carried out. Margaret Pearson was ordered to stand in the pillory in open market at Clitheroe, Padiham, Warley, and Lancaster, on 4 market days. The other prisoners were acquitted. But this did not stamp out the Lancashire witches, for so long as the people continued to believe in their supernatural powers, so long would the supply be equal to the demand. In 1633 another batch of 17 witches of Pendle were commanded to take their trial at Lancashire Assizes, and, singularly enough, one of the convicting justices was the John Starkey, who in 1596 was himself the subject of demoniac possession. The chief witness in this case was a stonemason, who on oath declared that he had seen 2 greyhounds, with which he tried to hunt a hare, but they refused to run, and on his beating them, they immediately became transformed, one into Dickinson's wife, and the other into a little boy. The former put a kind of bridle on the head of the latter, and he became a white horse, upon which she jumped, and, placing the witness before her, she rode away with him to a place called Horsestones, in Warley, which was about 1/4 mile off, where he found a number of persons all riding on horses of several colours. After this interesting congregation had feasted in the house, they adjourned to the barn, where he saw 6 of them kneeling and pulling at 6 ropes fastened to the roof, with which pulling came smoking flesh, butter in lumps, and milk. Margaret Johnson, though not one of the accused, confessed that she had been at a meeting at Horsestones, where there were present between 30 and 40 witches. She also said that men witches usually have women spirits, and women witches men spirits, and that Good Friday was the constant day for a yearly meeting of witches. All these prisoners were found guilty by the jury, but the judge delayed the execution of the sentence, and the matter in the meantime coming to the ears of the king, 4 of the convicted were sent up to London to be examined by the royal physicians and surgeons, and ultimately were brought before the king himself. The result was the acquittal of the lot. After this, The profession of witchcraft gradually died out, but the demoniac possession was harder to slay, as the exorcising of these spirits was a power highly valued alike by Roman Catholic priest and Puritan divine. The most famous instance of this class of deceptions was what is known as the Surry Demoniac, from its hero having lived at Surrey. The boy who was possessed was one Richard Dugdale, aged 19, the son of a gardener, and he apparently had all the symptoms required for the occasion, and acted the part required of him to perfection. Amongst other things, he was seen to vomit stones, silver and gold curtain rings, he could make himself as light as a feather booster, or as heavy as a load of corn, he had ventriloquial powers, and could speak out of the earth. All these were accompanied with the more violent signs, such as convulsions, contortions, shoutings, and the like. The curious part of this is the ready credence which was given to it. Over 30 people gave evidence, many of them on oath, as to the truth of the details furnished. The first pamphlet, giving an account of Satan's strange and dreadful actings in and about the body of Richard Dugdale, was published in London in 1697, and it called forth replies and counter-replies, the Reverend Thomas Jolly being one of the writers in support of the demoniac, and the Reverend Zachary Taylor, Vicar of Croston, one of those who believed the whole affair a fanatical imposture. For long years after this, the belief in the efficacy of certain charms lingered in the county, and even yet occasionally, on pulling down old barns and farmhouses, there are found hidden away amongst the rafters small boxes containing charms written on paper in a peculiar cipher, mixed up with signs of the planets, the whole purporting to be all-powerful to drive away all evil spirits from the building.